Hey, how's it going, everyone? I want to do a lesson on prayer. Just some thoughts that come to mind and were reinforced a little bit during a hangout last night. So I was on the non sequitur for a bit, talking about gravity, and hopefully I can get some more discussions on that with other people um, who are either experts or questioning it in a similar way as myself. But it was a good dialogue, and then I went on Red's Rhetoric's channel afterwards, and it started off with SpaceX, sort of meandered into um, tilting buildings, and then got into God, and the character of God as revealed in the Bible in particular, and then prayer came up, and I can just get a sense from not just them, that were on the call, but just people in general, like they're, and it's natural that it's like very similar to like an earthly analogy, where like if you call somebody all the time and they never reply, you would just either think that they don't exist, like they're dead, or they just don't care. It's like it's human nature. It makes sense, and so God is the same way. And it's even worse because in that human interaction, we might have actually experienced that person at some point, in the physical. So it's not like shocking to like even take the time to go and make those phone calls. Um, it's a reasonable thing to do. Whereas with God, many of us have not had those kind of encounters to even give us the motivation to start asking, and stuff. So that's a valid thing, and they're just like, why is God, an a-hole, and like why does he lie and deceive, and then also claim to, be true about everything, and very, very valid questions, because the Bible has these sort of paradoxes and things that don't make sense. Just to be totally blunt, they don't. And people who try and answer it like it does make sense, to me, are some of the most evil people on this earth. And I've done that throughout my life, and I don't do it, or I try to not do it at all anymore. I try to not go beyond the limits of what I know and what I believe and what I can back up, and and leave room for doubt, and uncertainty, and make it a probabilistic thing, which it is, and especially the Bible in particular, like I've said many times, Revelation. It's a higher probability in my mind that it's going to happen. It's it in my lifetime, but even in general. But I don't know with 100% certainty. And so, that's what I feel we're learning in this time. But people have figured this out throughout human history, and there are examples of where Jesus has healed somebody, and then they've gone to like the religious leaders, and they've asked him, like, what happened, and we remember you as like a lame person, and he just tells them his story. They kind of push him, but all he says is what happened. He's like, dude, what else do you want me to tell you? I'm paraphrasing this interaction, but he's just saying like, this just happened, like, what else do you want me to say? Like, this person came up, did this. I don't, you see this, I don't feel or look, sick anymore. And that's what happened, and that's it. And so there's no exaggeration, no padding the truth or anything like that, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's relevant to the flat earth, ball earth debate. And I've had to learn to kind of just stay in my lane as well in that, because I got to nibble away at it, because there's so many different variables and parameters in that I have to be very careful to not outstep my bounds. But the point I wanted to make was about prayer, and Reds and Jared and the other guy, the Clockwork guy, like, people, not just them, and I feel all of us who are here, even if it's like infrequently or privately, we do have a sense of wondering why we're here. It's natural human, question to ask, why are we here? What is our purpose and all that? I think certain people ask it more, and seek the answer more fervently. That doesn't make them necessarily a better person, but that's just a fact, and I would say throughout my life in different moments, I have done that, and I ask that question a lot and wonder, and I can't say I've gotten to much better of an answer, more clear of an answer, but certainly having the Bible as a more reliable narrative helps in that journey, because it gives me something to rest on, so to speak. And so, prayer is mentioned, many times in the Bible. Jesus teaches us how to pray, teaches us, our Father who art in heaven and all that stuff. And the one thing I want to talk about prayer is, to me, it's a form of negotiation with God, because you're asking, presumably we are asking God for something, whether it's wisdom or for him to acknowledge us in some way, to acknowledge that he cares, if he can take away pain, if he can bring us material things, or whatever, and so there's typically something tangible that's being asked for, requested, or not tangible, but something is being asked for. And it's important that we know that it comes from God. And so that's why we turn to him, and only he can do it. And so, that's the request. So it's very similar in the corporate world. If you go to your boss, your company, and, you ask for a raise or ask for something, if you have leverage, like you work really hard, you're smart, you've contributed a lot to the company, you're loyal to them, people like working with you, you're difficult to replace. All these things are leverage that will give you a much better chance of getting a raise, and so that's similar. Let's use that analogy with God. So let's say we approach God and we make a request, whatever it is. How do we get leverage with God? And so we look at Jesus, before he was, crucified. We see him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was, praying fervently that, if this can be, if this cup of suffering can be taken away, if there's any other way, he's asking, petitioning God, negotiating with God, can we do it another way? He didn't want to go through it. He had a physical body that experienced pain just like we would. If someone lashed us on our back, it's going to hurt a lot, and it's going to hurt him a lot. And even more so because he's being lashed by people and things that he's created. So it's even, there's an emotional pain that we wouldn't necessarily have to his depth if, like, the Romans were beating us. Obviously it would hurt, and you would forget about probably the emotional at some point, but there's another level of pain that he would be going through. And then he also has a much better awareness of the kingdom of heaven and what it's like. So he's experiencing quite a major difference from what he's accustomed to when he's being brutalized. And so there's a larger distance. It amplifies the pain as well relative to what he's used to. And so, but he negotiated with God, but his negotiation ended with basically like, but it's ultimately whatever you want, like I will, it's the same as if you go to your corporation and say, if I can have $1 an hour raise, but, that's my request, but ultimately, I'm still loyal to the company. Even if you don't do it, I'll still work here and all that kind of stuff, and reaffirm that, it's not a make or break kind of thing. And Jesus did the same thing. He basically said, if there is no other way, I'm going to go through with this. There's no, I surrender. I'm speaking as him. He surrendered his will to God and his fate. And so even someone like him, who has an incredible amount of leverage with God, his prayer was not answered as we would understand from a human perspective. He had to go through it. And so we have to be aware of that when we pray, that if God is willing to, I'm not saying he turned his back, because, the Most High's will is his will. So it's already been set and there's no changing it. So it's not like he was being cold. Jesus was going through what he was designed to go through, and that's just the way it is. And so, it's not like his prayer wasn't acknowledged by the Most High. And so we know that to not be true. And so, or it goes against the character of the God of the Bible. But we have to be sensitive to the fact that, even Jesus and with all of his leverage and all of his good works, still had to experience pain, an incredible amount. So in lieu of that truth that we know, according to the Bible, when we pray, and we have to be aware of that. So I'm not saying that that means that we have to just face every type of pain imaginable and just suck it up and, just don't ask God why and all that kind of stuff. To me, it doesn't make sense to not ask why. It's like, I suspect Jesus had deeper knowledge of why he had to go through that he wasn't at that time able to share with us, why exactly he had to come to earth and live that life and then die in that way. And so he knew, definitely more than we did. And, he knew that he had to go through it, and I think a lot of the pain and stuff that we go through, a lot of times it's magnified because we don't know why we're going through it. It doesn't make sense. Could be the result of somebody else, and even people close to us, loved ones, and all that kind of stuff. So it's like it makes even less sense in that kind of situation. And then we would ask God, why is this happening? And so ultimately, a lot of things that happen to us, we have to either believe that we're just being tortured randomly, and or there is a divine righteous purpose for it that we may not know what it is yet. And so to me, that's where faith comes in. We have to have faith that, and even if it ends up not being true, to me it's better to have faith even just to trick our brain and to make this existence like slightly digestible or slightly more digestible, and that there's a reason for it. It's like looking at Jesus's experience. If one were to look at that from an earthly perspective, you would see a guy live like a pristine life, righteous, virtuous, not stealing, not slandering or anything like that, and somehow being hung on a cross. Like, it would not make any sense. And so it wouldn't be like a logical result of the way he lived. And so one would think from an earthly perspective, he just got the short end of the stick. Like, he just got screwed over for no reason. And, what a shame that he would do all those good works and then meet that kind of an ending and premature death, and live in a truncated life. And so, but, we have to believe that and he also would have to have faith that was for a righteous purpose, and he doesn't understand the full picture at that time, in particular in the flesh. And so, he had to just go through it. And I think in many ways that's it's scary too, because a lot of people go through that type of pain and stuff regularly. And I'm not trying to trivialize what Jesus Christ, we call Yahushua, went through on the cross, but there are a lot of people who endure physical and emotional torment like daily. People who are enslaved, sex trafficking, and all that kind of stuff. And so, even people who've gone through stuff like that, and to me, it's still it's impossible to understand. It really is. Like, it's not easy at all to understand why people go through pain that they do. And to me, the only logical thing, unless you really think that you just got screwed and got the short end of the stick, is to turn to God. At least to turn to God and ask why. He may not necessarily answer, but if one doesn't do that, to me, that's a very hopeless place. And so, but let's think of just in general what we know from the Bible, how to gain leverage from God through prayer. First, if you're praying to God, believing that God exists is important. You're not just praying to the sky kind of thing. You have to have some sense that who we pray to is real, and we will be in that entity's presence, when we die, and that entity is the orchestrator of this whole thing. And so that's a very important thing. It's not just an empty prayer, and it's not just a quick fix kind of thing, And so that's hard enough. I do think flat Earth and other things happening now help us have encouragement, that reassurance that God does exist. But and so. The Bible also says when Jesus tells us to pray, it's like he says, lead us not into temptation, which shows that God does that. He does, lead people into temptation for his own purpose. And he says, forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And so, it's very important to get leverage with God is to do that. And that's a very, important thing, or else Jesus would not say to pray like that regularly, is that the Bible and the unforgiving servant is another classic parable where, God can forgive you, but then he's going to have an expectation that we go forgive everybody else, because the magnitude of his forgiveness towards us will always supersede, no matter what, the amount towards amongst humans. And so that will be a theological fact no matter what, even if it's a relatively small pardon towards us. That sin, as we learn in James, gets us committing the entire law, gets us going against the entire law. And so God pardoning us even for a minor infraction is now the theological reason to go and forgive people for everything. And that's not easy to do, and very few people can accomplish it perfectly, if any human, but that is what we're required, and that gets you leverage with God. And so that's a very important thing. It's like forgiving other people's and being quicker to exercise mercy over judgment is a way to get leverage with God, and doing it to people that quote unquote don't deserve it, like our enemies. And again, I'm not saying it's easy, or I've done this very often, if even at all, in my life, but this is for a person who is approaching God and maybe not getting the results that they want. They would need to do an inventory of their life, really, and the way they think and what they're doing to get God's attention, so to speak, to even have a chance of getting God's attention and response. And ultimately, the other main thing I want to talk about with God is that when you interact with an entity like this, he's not just looking for those things, which are important, those day-to-day things. It's not like he's basically, when you negotiate with God, in my opinion, you have to negotiate with your entire life, because everything else, physical and material, is already his. So it's like, you can't go to God and say, God, like this car that I got, it's I love it too much, or whatever, I'll give you that if you give me this, or whatever. It's like that, that's not enough for God. It's like, it's already his. All the elements that went in to make that car are his. And so the thing that we sort of have control over, at least he lets us think we have control over, is our life. And so that is the thing that would be enough for God, because that's the only thing that we have control over. And so, and Jesus says, in many places, that only those who give up their life for him will find true life. And so that's the way to align with God and to create at least the possibility for a connection to him, to interact with him. And that's a very important thing. And that's why it's kind of a shame that I have the mentality that I have now, where, my life is like, if it was on a stock, it's declining in value. Like, my own assessment of its value is declining. And, it's scary, but it also puts me in a very kind of empowered place, because, I don't really count my life as that much anymore. And so if I were to pray and negotiate with God, which I don't do that much, but, because I feel like it's kind of futile, like things are getting bad and there's no stopping it at this point. But it would be, to me, a strong point of leverage, because I just wouldn't care, and that's why I say in my videos that it would be interesting to have this mentality at a younger age, but I don't think I would make it to the age 37 that I'm at now. It's like, I just would be so I would have no feelings towards anything, like school or pursuing anything. I would just not be motivated, knowing that the system is like this and it's kind of designed to enslave. It would be very difficult for me to get motivated. So it's almost like I had to be ignorant to go through it. And I think a lot of people would echo that. And so, but to me, just that mindset of valuing your life very little is humble. It's humble. It's true, because our life is not that much unless God assigns it value, because we'll just die. If we just die and it's over, whether I die now or I die 20 years from now or 50 years from now, I'll ultimately die, and then I'll go away. And then so at some point the value is going to zero, unless God redeems it and makes zero into something, and that's totally up to him. And so only God can assign it value. So it's okay to lose to have zero value or perceived value of one's life on earth, in my opinion. And it's illogical to actually do that. It's like, if it's going to go to zero anyway, just and I'm speaking to myself in many ways, like, just make it zero now. We still live, we still do what we need to do to survive as best we can and help others, but it's like preemptively devalue the stock of my life to zero, which it will go to zero eventually, and then it's up to God to do what he wants to do, if anything at all, if God exists. And so that I don't have control over. I can't make a God, and I can't make God do something to whatever is potentially inside of me after I die. That's not something I myself can manufacture. And I'm thankful for that, because I would have no idea what would be next, to be honest. We can't think of those kind of things. What would be next? What would we do? What would keep us occupied? What would be worth our effort after we leave our physical body, if that's what happens? And so those are a couple powerful points that I want to make. That with prayer with God, two most important things I would say is that you have to forgive, and you have to forgive everybody. And it's I have struggles with that, holding grudges with people who I feel like have been involved in the coordination to enslave me and all that. I'm better at not blaming other people, because I know now that it's God that did it, so I kind of blame him for it. And in my opinion, he's comfortable with that. You have to be careful. I have to be careful how I word that blame to him and stuff, and not get emotional about it. And also, God, when you pray to him, it's on the order and on the magnitude of our life, like our existence on earth, our body, our entire body. That's the kind of thing that is worthy and acceptable. That's the only thing that we can bring to him that isn't already his, and even that is already his. So we're in a sense still using something that's already his for leverage. So we have to be aware of those things. Like, I'm not saying it's easy, and what people go through, it's not easy, and it's not getting easier by any means, but it just as an FYI, and just, again, this is my vantage point, and in many ways this is the answer for why I haven't had those kind of experiences with God, because I haven't done the things that he's asked for with any kind of consistency and with any kind of depth or magnitude and stuff. I understand it, like, from a theological perspective, and I value it and I appreciate it, is how it's embodied in Jesus Christ. But I can't say that I would be like the pinnacle, the prime example of somebody who's done that throughout their life. So, it's like, I'm not preaching to anybody anything that, like I'm holier than thou and I've done this and you should do what I do, kind of thing. I'm just stating kind of the theory and the theology, the roadmap, the recipe, for lack of a better term, for interacting with the God of the Bible, at least, if he exists. And so, going into 2019, people have, hopes, dreams, ambitions, and all the things that they're trying to pursue. I would just recommend people, and I'm doing this, at least slightly more and more daily, is consider, acknowledging God in the very least. And I would encourage interacting with him and asking him lots of things. It's like, ask him for something new every day. It's like, the Bible says, even if you called your parents, if they're on earth right now, and you ask them every day for something, and then, just one day, whether it's Christmas or whatever, they give it to you. If they'll do that, the Bible says we who are evil will do that. And then, so how much more would God do that for his children? And so becoming God's child is the important thing first. And God's children are aware of the fact that they are the worst sinners and in need of the most amount of mercy, and will be quick to extend that mercy to other people, and then be involved in every good work, taking care of the poor, the widows, and standing up for other people, the defenseless and all that. And then, God will, he'll respond, in his way and his time with his amplitude, whatever that is. And so I would definitely encourage people, whether they have a religious background or not, to approach God, the universe, however you think of it, ask for things. And in particular, if you ask for good things and protection for other people, to me, that's another powerful way to get leverage with God, is when you're asking for things for other people. And so that's another sort of, that would be maybe my third point, is a way to get leverage with God when you're asking him to bless others, and in particular the God of the Bible, bless your enemies. Okay, hope everyone has a good 2019 and New Year's and all that, and be safe out there. I use Lyft and Uber pretty much 100% of the time if I'm ever drinking. So I never, 99.9% of the time, I never drive my car while, I've had even just a glass of wine. So, I know money's tight for a lot of people, but I would definitely recommend doing that because, the cost of a DUI and all the putting other people's, lives in danger and potentially our own is not a good idea. And, the sad reality is there will be a lot of people driving drunk today. So like if you can stay more local to where you are and all that kind of stuff, just consider that. Okay, hope everyone's doing well. Bye.